Hi, I'm Callie and welcome to Kabowski Reads, and this is my 2021 wrap-up and my top 10 books of the year, and also my favourite book of the whole year. This year I had planned to read 60 books and I ended up reading 202 books. I have neglected a lot of my other hobbies in favour of reading this year. And according to Goodreads, I read 64,248 pages with an average book length of 318 pages, which is, I would say, probably on the shorter end of an average book, maybe. And it seemed like I've been pretty kind with my star ratings because my average book rating was 3.6. I do feel like I have had such a good year this year for 4 and 5 star books, or I've just been really kind. one of the two, but I feel like I've read a lot of really good books. Each month I do my book recommendation of the month, which I always refer to as Callie's book recommendation of the month that nobody asked for. At the start of the year I just thought that my top books of the year were gonna be the 12 books of the month, but when I was getting them all together I realised that there were some books that didn't make it to the book of the month for their particular month, and I hadn't stopped thinking about them, so I had to reconsider my top 10, which took an absolute age to do. I knew my top 3, but I ended up with about 15 books that I really wanted to be in my top 10 of the year, and while I could have just had a top 15, I decided that I really did want a top 10 because 10's a nice number. I suppose I'm just going to go through them from 10 to 1. Yeah, that seems like the only way to do this. At number 10, A Dream So Dark by L.L. McKinney. This book is the second book in the Nightmareverse series, which the other one is there. And this book was my pick of the month for July. This book is basically Alice in Wonderland meets Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's amazing, set in modern day, and Alice just kicks butt in Wonderland. But the Wonderland in this book is different to the Wonderland in the classic. If you want to read a book inspired by Alice in Wonderland and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, then I will recommend to you the first book in this series and then this book. There is a third book in this series, but it keeps being delayed. So I believe the last time I checked it's not out till 2023, which gives loads of time to reread books 1 and 2. The friendships in this book are just amazing. They're just so joyful to read. So my favourite part of this book was when a girl tried to use a shoe as a weapon. I loved it. Brought a little element of what would the friend who has no superpowers do when being attacked, and it just felt so right that Courtney would grab a shoe. I loved it. At number 9, The Cat Who Saved Books by Suzuki Natsukawa. This book was so short, but it was just so beautiful. It was beautifully written. This was a recent addition to my favourite book list. I read it in November and it just stuck with me, and I have found myself recommending it to people ever since. In this book, the main character is grieving for their grandfather and their home that they're going to be leaving, and they manage that grief through a number of quests with a cat in order to save the books. And I thought it was just really wonderfully written. I think it handled grief and loss just beautifully. At number 8 is Sophia Khan Is Not Obliged by Aisha Malik. This was the May book of the month. This is the second time that Aisha Malik has been in my favourites of the year. She was in my top 12 of the year for 2020 with This Green and Pleasant Land. The relationship between the family was just such a joy to read, and I really enjoyed reading about the fun family dynamic. The author always writes just such lovely and lovable characters, just a loving and lovely family. It's also really interesting to read about a culture that is different to my own. In this book, Sophia is writing an expose on the Muslim dating scene, which is something that I knew absolutely nothing about. So it was really interesting to read about that. Obviously this book does have some romance in it, and it was just the right kind of romance. It was exactly what I wanted at the time. And this book shows the right amount of love towards lemon puffs as a biscuit. They are a superior biscuit, and I agree entirely with Sophia's feelings towards them. So at number 7 is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Hanneman. Eleanor Oliphant was not completely fine. That book had been on my shelf for years and years, and I just hadn't picked it up because I just didn't remember what it was about, and had convinced myself I wasn't in the mood to read it. But it turns out as soon as I started reading it, I was absolutely hooked. The book was set in Glasgow, which I absolutely loved because I used to live there, so it was quite nice being able to recognise the streets, the shops. It's really interesting to read books that are set somewhere that I know and feel familiar with. This book also had such a slow reveal. I did not see it coming at all, and I just thought that it handled the topics so well. I don't want to go too much into it because I will just give you spoilers on the book. So Eleanor is a creature of habit. She always wears the same clothes, she always eats the same food, she also drinks a lot of vodka. Eleanor is hurting, and the book goes into why she's hurting and her ways to try to heal. And I really thought the book was absolutely fascinating. It warmed my little heart, and I'm all about the heartwarming reads. At number 6, I've got Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik, and this wasn't one of my top reads of a month because there were other books that month, but I absolutely loved this book. It was like a fairy tale. The book was Rumpelstiltskin inspired and was so beautifully written. I've read quite a lot of Naomi Novik's books, but I actually think that there's a strong possibility that this might be my favourite of all of their books, although I have such a soft spot in my heart for Uprooted. The book does have, I think, 3 main characters in it, but it only really has 2 main narratives. So we have the narrative of Irina, who is the daughter of a very wealthy man who is wanting to marry her off to the Tsar, and we follow that storyline, and it's very exciting. And also I absolutely loved her nanny, who's just this old woman who knits, and that is the kind of character that I feel I would be in a book, just old crone knitting away. It also features Miriam, who is the moneylender's daughter, and she ends up taking over from him because he's just such a kind-hearted moneylender that he hasn't been collecting, and somebody has to. So she steps up and does it, but in doing so ends up drawing the attention of somebody that she does not want to draw the attention of. The story does also include Wanda, who I think of as being one of the main characters, but she doesn't get her own narrative. I really enjoyed her story, and I did want a little bit more from her point of view, but to achieve that, the book would have ended up having to be about 100 pages longer, and it kind of felt like it was the right length. Number 5, I've got The Guest List by Lucy Foley. This was my book of the month for March, and this is, again, the second time that Lucy Foley has featured in my top books of the year. Hunting Party made it into my top 12 of 2020, and The Guest List was written in just such a similar way to The Hunting Party. It's a murder mystery, multiple viewpoints, and we don't know who has been killed, and it could have been anybody. I just lapped it up. I just thought this book was so clever. I was just kept guessing right up until the end, which in a good murder mystery, that should be the case. It was an absolute joy to read. I was just hooked, and I wanted more. I wanted to read more murder mysteries, and I read a lot of murder mysteries. And then this was the point where it got really hard to pick my top 4, because I could have had any of these books at my number 1 read for the year. I had to think long and hard, and I actually had to get a notepad and pen out and just start making points to help me decide. So at number 4, Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I absolutely love this book. This was my book of the month for February, and I have loved this book since February, and I've been thinking about it since February, and as a result I've gone on to read 2 or 3, I can't remember right now, more books by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and I've loved them all. So this is a new favourite author for me. This book was set in Mexico during the Jazz Age, and basically our protagonist accidentally frees a Mayan god, and she has to help him get his throne back. And it was just so exciting and so interesting, and I don't know that much about Mayan gods, and so this book not only gave me a thrilling story, but I also ended up, it took me a while to read it because I kept going off to Google bits about Mayan gods because I was just so interested to find out more. I absolutely loved the main character, who I believe her name is Cassiopeia. I may be pronouncing that wrong. And she was just so brave, and very courageous, and I loved that she thought about herself for once in her whole life. It was a really, really enjoyable book, and I will not stop recommending it. Number 3, I've got The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. This was my June book of the month, and for the longest time I thought this was going to be my book of the year because I loved it that much. And this book, Linus, it goes off to check an orphanage. This book had such strong found family vibes, which is something that it turns out I absolutely love in a book, and I will not stop thinking about how much I loved Theo. I loved Theo. He was a little dragon, and he liked coins. He really liked buttons, but coins were like buttons, and he was just so cute, and I loved him. And I loved all of the little kids in this book. They were just adorable. I mean, yes, one of them wanted to bash you over the head with a shovel, but other than that, oh, and one was the Antichrist. They were just sweet little kids. And this book was just, I feel that this book was just such an important book about just not judging people and finding your own little family and standing up for what is right, even if that goes against your job or your instructions. I just thought this book was just so important, and it left me feeling so warm and fuzzy. My number 2 pick for my book of the year was my September book of the month, which was This Poison Heart by Kaylin Bayron, and I love this book. I've already pre-ordered book 2 in this series, which is not out until the 21st of June or something like that. My birthday's in June, so I've bought it as a birthday gift. I'm very excited to read the second book and continue. This book, it gave me everything. Rises has the gift when it comes to plants, and this book made me care about plants and gardens, and I do not care about gardening at all. My mother is a gardener. I have no interest. I can't keep a cactus alive, but this book made me care about plants. And this was a young adult book, and the parents in this book were just, I loved them. I loved Mo, I loved Mom, I loved them. The family unit in this was just so positive and so lovely and loving. I now want to join their family. This book also had elements of mythology in it. So magical powers, magic, plants, family secret, a grand house, and mythology. This book had everything in it. This book had a huge twist that, again, I didn't see coming, and I absolutely loved it. This book was just so fast paced. There was always something happening, and I just didn't want to stop reading it. So my number one book of the year was my November book of the month, and that was Duck Feet. So Duck Feet by Eli Percy. And I should be holding up my copy of Duck Feet just now, but I've actually loaned it to a friend so that they can enjoy it. So I don't have my physical copy right now because I'm on a one-woman mission to make sure that everybody reads it. The book was just absolute perfection. Scots language book, all about a working class kid growing up in the aughties on the west coast of Scotland, and I thought the book was just beautiful. It was heartwarming, it was nostalgic, I loved the character growth in it, I loved the friendships in the book, I loved the main character, her family. I absolutely loved the book. I ugly cried during this book. I felt ill because I was so emotionally invested in the characters. I thought it was such a powerful book, and it won the Saltire Award this year because it's an amazing book. And I'm sure that my award of Book of the Year is not as impressive as the Saltire and has no trophy, but I absolutely loved Duck Feet, and I found Kirsty to just be so relatable and just so charming, and I really enjoyed her story. And the things that she went through were not all nice and fluffy, which, you know, I love a nice and fluffy book. This was not nice and fluffy, but there were parts of it that were. It just felt real. I feel like Kirsty could be a real person just telling me the story of her growing up, and I thought it was just such a beautiful read. I also really enjoyed that it was written in Scots language. I thought that was just a nice little touch. So that's it. It's my top 10 reads of 2021, and my absolute favourite book of the year goes to Duck Feet by Eli Percy. I recommend everybody reads this book. Even if you're not Scottish, still think you'll be able to understand it, and I think it will warm your heart. The sun has completely set now, so I think that's my hint that I should say goodbye. It's 3:30 and the sun is completely gone and I am in shadows. So thanks for watching. Bye!